So that foundation is laid by Dole and Lincoln. Because Dole will go out and he'll create more treaties with American Indians than any other prior Commission of Indian Affairs combined. Why does he do that? Well, that's the debate in history. Is he doing that to prevent extinction and conflict, or is he simply doing that to prevent conflict that'll take away from the Civil War? Does that make sense? Some historians will say the only reason they're out there negotiating is they don't really care about the Indians. They're going to mow them down after the war anyway, but let's keep them peaceful until the war's over and we get the army out there. That's, of course, the right answer because Lincoln is a Midwesterner. Of course, he wants expansion. Well, slavery's going to be over after the war. Does Lincoln really want expansion? We don't know. That's the debate in history. No, Dole's really trying to keep the peace. He actually establishes some reservations. Lincoln has discussions with every delegation of American Indians that comes to meet him, and he never talks about taking up. He does talk about taking up the white man's ways, but he never talks about we're going to kill you or we're going to fight you if you don't do this thing right. Do you see the debate? And what is Lincoln's real thoughts? Well, that's something left to history. You know, the what ifs. What if Lincoln would have lived? The famous what ifs. Gabor Bort, who wrote a book on Lincoln, was in a historical debate in Boston about busing in the 1980s. Remember, busing was a real controversy in the 1980s. And somebody asked Gabor Bort, well, what would Lincoln say about busing? And you know what Bort's response was? He said, no, Lincoln would say, what's a bus? Okay. This is from an actual 1869 paper, which is obviously after Lincoln's death, but it gives you the idea of what Westerners' attitudes, white Westerners' attitudes are towards American Indians. Can you all read that in the back? I know it's not I'm not a pro at PowerPoint, so the slides kind of come and go. Any thoughts on that?
Sounds like Phil Sheridan.
Well, the only good Indian's a dead Indian, which he denies saying. And Sherman, of course, is not a big fan of American Indians, although he's not a very big fan of black people. And he is a big fan of Southerners, but he killed more Southerners than he did anything else. So, I don't know. And he actually freed more black people than any other human being alive. Sherman did. So that's that debate we can have in history about what is... Well, I'll get into that at the end. Go ahead, Brian. Thanks. The biggest war fought during Lincoln's administration against Indians is the Dakota War of 1862. These are some settlers who are escaping the American Indian attacks, the Dakotas attack. Any ideas why the Dakotas are upset? White encroachment. Whites encroach on their lands. The government bribes them with annuity promises. Of course, the war is going on, so what's happening to their annuities? They're not getting them. Whites continue to encroach after the Homestead Act's passed. What do you do if you're the Dakota? And that's a great question to ask your students. I mean, it's easy to say you're against the war in Iraq or for the war in Iraq. But now ask the students, well, you're the president, what do you do now? Pull out all the troops, Civil War breaks out. Leave all the troops in, more Americans get killed, it costs money, the economy's in a shambles. So what do you do if you're the Lincoln, I mean, what do you do if you're the Indians, excuse me? If you're the Dakota, what would you do?
Fight.
You'd fight. Would you fight soldiers?
Soldiers are in the war. So.
Yeah, soldiers aren't even around. There's some militiamen around, and they mow them down quick. And then they kill women, they kill children, they rape women, they kill over 400 whites, the Dakota do. How is that going to cause Americans to react? White Americans. Angry. Minnesota is a key state that Lincoln needs to keep the Civil War going. You got to remember, the Civil War was not a popular fight in 1862. Yankees aren't doing too good. Us Southerners are doing pretty well in 1862. So he's got to keep the Minnesotans happy. So what does he do? He sends out, well, I'm drawing a blank, McDowell. Irvin McDowell, who got his butt kicked in the first Bull Run. And of course, as you know, with every general that loses a battle to Lincoln gets what? Fired. And McClellan takes McDowell's spot. So Irvin McDowell gets sent out to fight the American Indians with Pope. And what happens is they win. They got enough soldiers, they organize. Lincoln has to keep Minnesotans happy. Minnesotans contribute. Remember, the Midwest contributes a huge number of soldiers to the Union Army. The Midwest does not get enough attention for that. So they mow down the Dakota, arrest 300 of them, put them on trial, and condemned 300 of them to execution. My numbers aren't real good. I'm not a math person, so it's around 300. Maybe it's 320, 340, something like that. Have trials for every one of them. Every one of them is set to be executed. Lincoln kind of freaks out. He's dealing with the Civil War, but he can't have 340 people being executed while he's president. What does he do? He requests all the trial transcripts. And the rumor is, among the cabinet, he reads every single trial transcript. As a lawyer, he would understand them, he would know them, and he commutes 270 of the sentences from death to removal. And the other 30 he has ordered executed. Minnesota politicians are sending letters to him, if you don't execute all these people, we're going to overrun the soldiers and kill them anyway. I mean, you see these letters of just hatred. That's why I kind of showed you that Western newspaper. It's just the hatred they have for these Dakota. Wait till they killed your wife and child, you might be a little ticked off as well. So Minnesotans are really angry. So Lincoln, the politician and the humanitarian, commutes 270 of them and executes 30. And this is the picture of the 38. Sorry, I told you my numbers aren't perfect. 38 Sioux Indians are killed in Mankato, Minnesota. There's a long march every year that the Dakota tribe takes on from Mankato to where they're removed to in southern, it's in southern Minnesota. But the Dakota still exists today. They have 2 reservations. Would they have existed today if Lincoln wouldn't have commuted their sentences? Would they have existed today if the reservation system wouldn't have come in place? That's a debate you could have as well. You don't see too many Indians on the East Coast. What, like the Wampanoags, Mohawks, pretty small percentage of Indians there. And yet the Dakota have 2 reservations and thousands of them still live there. So was that a good thing or a bad thing Lincoln did? Well, it's a politically astute. He does have humanitarians calling for him to commute the sentences. I mean, I'm not going to give him total credit, but he understands the politics of it. And I think at the same time as a humanitarian, I mean, when does Lincoln free the slaves? Well, he doesn't free them until January 1st of '63. Why does he do that? Well, he uses it as a war measure, but most would argue he wants to free the slaves a lot sooner. But politically, how can he deal with things? And this is another example of Lincoln's politically astute actions. Sure.
Where does he move the tribe to?
Indian Territory, Kansas, I believe. A lot of them die on the way. Again, the Long Walk also takes place, if you know the Navajo Long Walk also takes place during Lincoln's presidency when the Navajo moved from the Four Corners area of Arizona, New Mexico to a reservation in New Mexico. But Lincoln doesn't have a whole lot of involvement in that. And the same thing with the removal of the Cherokee. Jackson's not even president when that happens. It's actually Van Buren. And the question is logistics. How do you supply these American Indians? And then everything is done in cash for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Office of everything's done in cash, and these guys just rip off the American Indians. The government supplies plenty of money to remove these people, except for maybe the Long Walk. For the removal and for the removal of the Dakota and the removal of the Fox and Sac. They're all provided plenty of money, but these traders rip off the government. Everything's done in cash, and it's just a very common way to make a ton of money. Let's say you could work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 3 years and retire. And their salary is $1,000 a year. So you can wonder how they retire. Anybody know who that is? John Ross. Anybody know who John Ross is?
Or the Cherokee chief?
Right. During removal, he's the one that resists removal the most. But the small percentage of the tribe that Jackson manipulates into signing the removal treaty is opposed by John Ross. And if you know, Stan Waddy, who's the last Confederate general to surrender, who's also Cherokee, is in the other side. There's that 2 sides the Cherokee divided. And Stan Waddy is the only pro-removal Cherokee that is not executed by the anti-removal Cherokee when they get to Oklahoma. I don't know if you knew that, but a lot of those Indians that signed the treaty, almost every one of them was executed except for Stan Waddy.